The security footage showed something that made my blood run cold. A black janitor, the quiet one who always kept his head down, was sitting at a senior executive's computer in the restricted R&D wing. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a fluency that didn't belong to someone who pushed a mop for a living. Then he plugged in a USB drive and started downloading files. I had built my entire career on reading people, and everything about this man screamed one-word threat. But what I discovered when I followed him home would shatter every assumption I'd ever made about him, about my company, and about myself. I had a gift for seeing what others missed. At 38, I was the youngest CEO in Apex Innovations history, a title I'd earned not through connections or luck, but through an almost surgical ability to cut through noise and find the truth beneath. In an industry dominated by men who confused confidence with competence, I had learned to trust only what I could verify. That's why I was still in my office late into the night, reviewing security protocols for the 100th time. Project Sentinel was right around the corner from launch, $50 million, 3 years of development, a next-generation data security platform that would either cement Apex Innovations' position as an industry leader or expose us as pretenders. The pressure was immense, and I had responded the only way I knew how, by controlling everything I could control. I pulled up the security feeds on my laptop, scanning through the footage with practiced efficiency. Empty hallways, locked server rooms, the night security guard scrolling through his phone at the front desk. And then I saw him, the janitor. I'd noticed him before, in the way you notice furniture. Present but unremarkable. A black man in his early 40s, always in the same gray uniform, always pushing his cleaning cart through the hallways with his eyes fixed on the floor. He never made small talk with the night staff, never lingered in break rooms. He moved through Apex Innovations like a ghost, appearing only to empty trash cans and vanish again. But ghosts didn't sit at executive workstations late at night. I leaned closer to my screen, my pulse quickening. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The janitor, I pulled up his file, Andre Coleman, had somehow accessed the R&D wing. He was seated at Brian Santos's desk, the lead systems architect, typing with a speed and precision that sent ice through my veins. Then came the USB drive. I watched him plug it into the port and begin transferring files. My mind raced through the implications. Project Sentinel's source code, client databases, proprietary algorithms worth millions. I checked the access logs. This wasn't the first time. Andre Coleman had been doing this for weeks. My hand moved toward my phone, ready to call security, ready to call Victor Lang, the CFO, who would know exactly how to handle this kind of threat, ready to do what any responsible CEO would do when faced with clear evidence of corporate espionage. But something stopped me. A memory, unwanted and sharp, surfaced from a place I'd tried to bury. 12 years ago, I had been a junior analyst at a firm that no longer existed. I developed a presentation strategy that caught the attention of the CEO and the jealousy of my supervisor, a man named Kevin Brooks. 2 weeks before my promotion was announced, Kevin went to HR with a devastating accusation. I had stolen his work. He had documentation, emails he'd fabricated, drafts he'd backdated, a narrative so clean and convincing that I found myself escorted from the building before I could say a word in my defense. The investigation took 3 months. 3 months of my reputation bleeding out while Kevin continued attending meetings and accepting praise for ideas that were never his. 3 months of colleagues who'd smiled at me in hallways, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. I was eventually cleared. Kevin was fired. But I never forgot the lesson those 3 months taught me. The system doesn't wait for truth, it reacts to suspicion. And once suspicion attaches to your name, it leaves a stain that never fully washes out. I'd sworn in the aftermath that I would never do to someone else what Kevin Brooks had done to me. I would never condemn without evidence, never assume guilt based on appearance or circumstance. Never make someone else feel the way I'd felt in that HR conference room, watching my career die while a man who looked trustworthy told lies about me. I pulled my hand back from the phone. I looked at the frozen image on my screen. Andre Coleman caught in the act. A black janitor with no business being anywhere near executive systems. Every instinct I'd developed in 2 decades of corporate survival told me what this was. But instincts had been wrong before. Mine had been wrong about Kevin Brooks. I'd trusted him, considered him a mentor right up until the moment he tried to destroy me. What if I was wrong now in the opposite direction? I needed more information. I needed to understand what Andre Coleman was actually doing before I made a decision that could ruin his life. I closed the security feed and pulled up his personnel file. Andre Coleman, 42 years old, hired 18 months ago through a temp agency. No criminal record, no red flags, just a standard background check that showed exactly what you'd expect from a night janitor. Previous jobs in maintenance and cleaning, a GED, an address in the South Side neighborhood in Bronzeville, one of the poorer areas on the South Side. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained how a man who cleaned toilets for a living could navigate a restricted computer system like he'd built it himself. I dug deeper, running his social security number through every database I had access to. The results came back thin, too thin. It was as if Andre Coleman had barely existed before 18 months ago. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to report this, not yet, not until I knew the truth. The next night, when Andre Coleman finished his shift and walked out of Apex Innovations, I was going to follow him. The next morning arrived with the chaos I had come to expect. The conference room on the 32nd floor was filled with tension thick enough to taste. Project Sentinel's final review meeting had devolved into barely concealed panic as the engineering team presented their progress report, or rather their lack of it. I sat at the head of the table, my expression neutral, as Brian Santos, the lead systems architect, explained why certain security protocols still weren't functioning properly. The core architecture has some legacy issues we're still working through, Brian said, his voice tight. The original foundation was built on a framework that's complicated. We're confident we can resolve it before launch, but you've been confident for weeks, I interrupted calmly, and we launch soon. Brian's face flushed. We're doing everything we can. I studied him for a moment. Brian was competent, genuinely competent, but he was also clearly out of his depth. The way he kept referring to the original foundation and legacy framework suggested he was wrestling with something he didn't fully understand. The door opened and Victor Lang walked in. At 55, the CFO carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged. Silver-haired and impeccably dressed, Victor had been with Apex Innovation since before I was hired. He'd supported my promotion to CEO 3 years ago, a fact he reminded me of whenever he wanted something. Megan, he said warmly, taking a seat beside me, I heard we're having some technical difficulties. Nothing the team can't handle, I replied, though my eyes stayed on Brian. Victor smiled the way he always did, reassuring, paternal, slightly condescending. I'm sure, but if we need to discuss contingency options, my door is always open. He glanced around the room. We've overcome bigger challenges than this. The meeting continued for another hour, but my mind kept drifting back to the security footage. To Andre Coleman, typing in the dark, like he owned the place. When the meeting finally ended, Victor lingered as the others filed out. You seem distracted, he observed. I weighed my words carefully. I noticed something odd in the security feeds last night. One of the cleaning staff was in a restricted area after hours. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Which staff member? The janitor, Andre Coleman? The flicker again, barely perceptible. Ah, Victor nodded slowly. I'd recommend reporting it to security immediately. These things have a way of escalating if left unchecked. I want to look into it myself first, make sure I understand what I'm seeing before I make any accusations. Victor's smile returned, but it was tighter now. Megan, I appreciate your thoroughness. I do, but with the launch right around the corner, you don't have time to play detective with a janitor who's probably stealing office supplies. Probably, I repeated. You know how these things usually go. Victor stood, straightening his jacket. People like that. They see an opportunity, they take it. It's not complicated. Report it to security, let them handle it, and focus on what matters. People like that. The phrase hung in the air between us. I thought about what I'd seen on the footage. The way Andre moved through the system, the precision, the familiarity. That wasn't someone stealing office supplies. That was someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. I'll handle it my way, I said finally. Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes cooled by several degrees. Of course, you're the CEO. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Just remember, when things go wrong, it's your name on the line, not the janitor's. He left without waiting for a response. I sat alone in the empty conference room, Victor's words echoing in my mind. People like that. I'd heard that phrase before, in different contexts from different mouths. It was the kind of phrase that pretended to be about behavior while actually being about something else entirely. I thought about Andre Coleman, a black man who kept his head down, who cleaned floors and emptied trash and made himself invisible. A man who, according to every assumption Victor was making, couldn't possibly be anything other than what he appeared to be. But I had seen the footage. I had seen his hands on that keyboard. Whatever Andre Coleman was, he wasn't what he appeared to be. And that night, I was going to find out the truth. Late that night, Andre Coleman finally emerged from the Apex Innovations building. I watched him cross the parking lot from my car, a black sedan I'd parked in the shadow of a delivery truck 3 rows back. He moved differently out here than he did inside. His shoulders weren't quite as hunched, his gaze not quite as fixed on the ground. He was still careful, still quiet, but there was something almost human about the way he adjusted the strap of his worn backpack and looked up at the sky for a brief moment before heading toward the bus stop. I waited until he boarded the bus before pulling out of my parking spot. Following a bus through the city at midnight was easier than I'd expected. The streets were mostly empty, and the bus made frequent stops, giving me plenty of time to hang back without losing sight of it. I felt ridiculous, a CEO in a $60,000 car tailing a janitor like some amateur private investigator. But I'd committed to this course of action, and Megan Lawson never abandoned a course of action once she'd committed. The bus wound through increasingly unfamiliar territory. The gleaming office towers of downtown Chicago gave way to strip malls and fast food restaurants, which in turn gave way to narrow streets lined with check-cashing stores and laundromats with bars on their windows. I had lived in Chicago for 15 years and had never been to this part of it. Andre got off at a stop in front of a church with a collapsed steeple. I pulled over half a block back and watched him walk down a side street past a row of boarded-up houses until he reached a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign over the door. Rising Stars Community Center. The paint was faded, the letters chipped, but someone had clearly put effort into making the place look welcoming. There were children's drawings taped to the windows, rockets and robots, and stick figures holding hands under rainbows. A banner above the door announced free coding classes Tuesdays and Thursdays, all ages welcome. I sat in my car watching Andre disappear through the front door. Coding classes. The janitor who could navigate restricted computer systems was teaching coding classes in a community center that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. I should leave. I'd seen enough to know that Andre Coleman wasn't selling Apex Innovations secrets to a competitor. Whatever he was doing with those files, it wasn't corporate espionage. But the question remained, what was he doing? Before I could talk myself out of it, I was out of the car and walking toward the building. The inside of Rising Stars Community Center smelled like old books and industrial cleaner. The walls were covered with motivational posters and more children's artwork, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the particular frequency of fixtures that hadn't been replaced in decades. I had prepared a cover story. I was a potential donor interested in supporting local education initiatives, but the elderly woman at the front desk barely looked up from her crossword puzzle before waving me toward the back room. "Computer class is through there," the woman said. "Mr. Andre just started. You can watch from the back if you want." I thanked her and walked down a narrow hallway past a storage closet and a bathroom with an out-of-order sign until I reached a room at the end. I stopped in the doorway. Andre Coleman stood at the front of the room facing a group of about 15 children. They ranged in age from maybe 7 to 14. A mix of black and brown faces clustered around ancient desktop computers that looked like they belonged in a museum. Andre was explaining something about variables and loops, his voice patient and warm in a way that made my chest tighten. This was not the man I'd watched on security footage. That man had been quick, efficient, almost mechanical in his movements. This man smiled. This man crouched down next to a little boy who was struggling and guided his hands on the keyboard with the gentleness of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Remember what I told you," Andre was saying. "The computer only does exactly what you tell it to do, so if something goes wrong, it's not because the computer is broken, it's because we need to be more specific about what we want." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "But Mr. Andre, what if I don't know what I want?" Andre considered the question seriously as if it were the most important thing anyone had asked him all day. "Then you experiment," he said. "You try one thing, and if it doesn't work, you try another thing. That's what coding is, really. It's just trying things until something works." And you know what? Life is pretty much the same way. I watched him move through the room, checking on each student, offering encouragement and corrections in equal measure. He knew every child's name. He knew their projects, their struggles, their small victories. When one boy finally got his program to run correctly and the screen filled with colorful shapes, Andre's face broke into a smile so genuine that it hurt to look at. This was not a thief. This was not a corporate spy. This was a teacher. But that still didn't explain how a night janitor had the skills to teach children to code or why he was using Apex Innovations equipment after hours to download files. I was so absorbed in watching Andre that I almost didn't notice the girl who had slipped into the room from a side door. She was about 11, with braided hair and glasses that were slightly too big for her face. She carried a worn school bag covered in patches and pins, and she made her way to an empty seat in the corner with the practiced silence of someone who didn't want to interrupt. But as she passed Andre, she reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Hey, baby girl," Andre said quietly, his voice softening even further. "Homework done?" "All of it," the girl whispered back, "even the extra credit." "That's my Lila." Lila, his daughter. The girl from the personnel file. I had noticed a dependent listed, but hadn't thought much about it at the time. Now, watching Andre return to his lesson while stealing glances at his daughter settling into her seat, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just a man teaching coding classes. This was a father trying to give his child a different future. I left before the class ended. I sat in my car for a long time staring at the peeling sign above the community center door, trying to reconcile what I'd just witnessed with what I'd seen on the security footage. Andre Coleman could code, not just basic skills, the way he'd explained concepts to those children. The natural fluency of his instruction spoke to years of professional experience. He wasn't someone who'd picked up programming as a hobby. He was someone who had lived and breathed it, which meant the question wasn't whether Andre had the skills to access Apex Innovation systems. He clearly did. The question was why a man with those skills was mopping floors for $12 an hour. I pulled out my phone and began to dig. The Apex Innovations archives were supposed to be accessible only to senior executives, but I had never seen anyone actually use them. The company was only 12 years old, and most of its history was still alive in the memories of people who worked there. But I needed to go back further than memory. I needed to go back 5 years. The search took me most of the night. I sat in my home office surrounded by the expensive, minimalist furniture I'd chosen to project success, scrolling through personnel records and project documentation and internal communications that should have been purged years ago but had somehow survived in forgotten backup folders. Deep into the early hours, I found it. A personnel file, not the thin, recent one for Andre Coleman, the janitor, but an older file buried in an archived directory labeled Terminated Employees Year 7. Andre James Coleman, Senior System Architect, Employee ID 4729. I stared at the screen, my tired eyes struggling to process what I was seeing. The photograph in the file showed a different man. Not physically, the face was the same, but everything else had changed. The Andre in this photo wore a tailored shirt and confident smile. His shoulders were squared, his gaze direct. He looked like someone who belonged in a corner office, not pushing a mop through empty hallways at midnight. According to the file, Andre had been hired 8 years ago as a mid-level engineer. Within 2 years, he'd been promoted to Senior System Architect, one of the most critical positions in the company. His performance reviews were glowing. Exceptional technical vision, invaluable asset to the team, instrumental in developing core infrastructure. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated to the technical documentation from that period. The original architecture of Apex Innovation's primary platform, the same platform that Project Sentinel was built upon, had been designed by a small team of engineers. And the lead architect on that team, the person credited with creating the foundational framework that everything else depended on, was Andre Coleman. Brian Santos's words from the meeting echoed in my mind. The original foundation was built on a framework that's complicated. Complicated because the person who built it was no longer there to explain it. But why? Why would Apex Innovations let go of someone so valuable? I found the termination record buried in a separate folder. Terminated for cause, violation of confidentiality agreements, unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information to external parties. The words were clinical, final. They painted a picture of a man who had betrayed his company's trust. Exactly the kind of person who might return years later as a janitor to finish what he'd started. Except I had learned 12 years ago in an HR conference room that termination records could lie. I kept digging. The email was in a folder that had been marked for deletion but never actually erased. A digital ghost, preserved by the kind of bureaucratic oversight that I usually found infuriating but was now profoundly grateful for. It was dated 5 years and 3 months ago. The sender was Andre Coleman. The recipient was Victor Lang. I read it once, then again, then a third time, each reading making me feel more sick than the last. The email was a formal whistleblower complaint. Andre had discovered that Apex Innovations leadership, specifically a group of executives that included Victor, had been secretly selling user data to third-party advertisers. Not anonymized data, not aggregated statistics. Actual user information, including names, locations, and browsing histories sold to the highest bidder in direct violation of the company's privacy policy and multiple federal regulations. Andre had documented everything. Transaction records, email chains between executives and buyers, a paper trail so damning that it could have destroyed Apex Innovations entirely if it had ever reached regulators or the press. He'd sent it to Victor because Victor was the CFO, the person theoretically responsible for ensuring the company operated within legal and ethical boundaries. He'd trusted the system to do what it was supposed to do. 2 weeks after sending that email, Andre Coleman was terminated for unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information. I sat back in my chair, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Andre hadn't leaked company secrets. He'd tried to report a crime, and Victor, who had smiled at me in meetings and called me Megan in that warm paternal voice, had destroyed him for it. I thought about what I'd seen at the community center. The faded Apex Innovations logo in the corner of Andre's teaching materials, old presentations probably from his days as a real employee. The way he'd looked at his daughter, the weariness in his voice when he'd talked about life being about trying things until something works. 5 years ago, Andre Coleman had been a respected engineer with a promising career. He'd done the right thing, reported wrongdoing through the proper channels, trusted that the system would protect him. and the system had chewed him up and spit him out. I thought about Victor's words from the meeting. People like that, they see an opportunity, they take it. He hadn't been talking about janitors or thieves. He'd been talking about a man he'd personally destroyed, a man whose life he'd ruined to protect his own secrets. And he'd said it with a smile, confident that I would never look deeper, never question the narrative he'd constructed. I'd almost proven him right. The next morning, I arrived at Apex Innovations to find the building in chaos. Engineers were running between conference rooms, phones were ringing unanswered. Brian Santos stood in the middle of the main floor, his face pale and his hands shaking as he stared at his laptop screen. "What happened?" I demanded. Brian looked at me with the expression of a man watching his career collapse in real time. "The security framework," he said. "There's a critical vulnerability in the core architecture. If we launch Sentinel like this, the entire system could be bypassed within hours. Everything we've built, everything, it's worthless if we can't fix this." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. "How long to fix it?" Brian shook his head. "We don't know. The problem is in the foundational code, the stuff that was written years ago. None of us really understand how it works. We've been building on top of it, but the actual architecture," he trailed off, helpless. "We'd need the person who originally designed it to even know where to start." The person who originally designed it? I looked across the room and saw Victor Lang standing by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low, urgent tones, his silver hair slightly disheveled for the first time since I had known him. When he hung up, he walked toward me with the measured stride of someone delivering bad news. "We need to discuss contingency plans," he said quietly. "I've spoken with the board. They're prepared to authorize a delay if necessary. A delay means losing our market position. We've been promising this launch for months. Better a delay than a disaster." Victor's voice was smooth, reasonable. "These things happen. We can blame the technical team, restructure, try again in 6 months. Blame the technical team. Let Brian Santos and his engineers take the fall for a problem rooted in decisions made years before they were hired. Protect the real source of the dysfunction, the fact that the company had driven out the one person who understood the system and let others suffer the consequences." It was exactly what Victor had done to Andre, and now he wanted to do it again. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time the man he actually was. Not a mentor, not an ally, just another person protecting his own power at any cost. "I need 24 hours, I said. "For," Victor frowned. "For what?" "To find another solution." "Megan," his tone was patient, condescending. "There is no other solution. The only person who could fix this is someone who understands the original architecture, and that person is—" He stopped abruptly as if catching himself before saying too much. "That person is who?" I pressed. Victor's expression flickered just for a moment, then the mask was back. "No one," he said. "That person is no one." That night, I drove back to Rising Stars Community Center. The coding class had ended hours ago. The building was dark, except for a single light in a window near the back. I parked across the street and sat for a long moment, gathering my courage. I thought about what I was about to do. I was about to approach a man my company had destroyed and ask for his help. A man who had every reason to hate everything Apex Innovations represented. A man who had been punished for doing the right thing and had spent 5 years rebuilding his life from nothing. I had no right to ask him for anything, but I was going to ask anyway. I got out of the car and walked toward the building. The back room of the community center served as a makeshift office. Andre sat at a battered desk, grading what looked like homework assignments under the light of a single lamp. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then Andre leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I wondered when you'd show up." I blinked. "You knew I was following you." Lady, you drive a car that costs more than most people around here make in 2 years. You think nobody noticed you parked outside last night? He shook his head slowly. And I've been watching the security feeds too. Saw someone accessing my personnel file late at night. Wasn't hard to figure out who. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated. I thought I was the one doing the investigating. It hadn't occurred to me that Andre might be investigating right back. Can I sit down? I asked. Andre gestured to a folding chair across from his desk. It was plastic and uncomfortable, clearly designed for children. I sat. Anyway, I know who you are, I said. I know what you were, and I know what they did to you. Andre's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then you know more than most people. What do you want? I took a breath. Project Sentinel is failing. There's a critical flaw in the core architecture, the architecture you designed. My entire engineering team has been trying to fix it, but they don't understand the system well enough. We're days from launch, and if we can't solve this problem, the company loses everything. And you want me to help? It wasn't a question. Yes. Andre laughed. It was a bitter sound, entirely without humor. You want me to save the company that destroyed my life, the company that blacklisted me from the entire industry, the company that made it so I couldn't get a job anywhere? Not as an engineer, not as a consultant, not even as a help desk technician. You want me to help them? I want you to help me. Same thing. No, I said firmly, it's not. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. I know what Victor Lang did to you. I found the email. I know you tried to do the right thing, and I know he buried you for it. And I know that right now he's trying to delay the launch so he can blame the technical team and walk away clean, just like he walked away clean after what he did to you. Andre's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. If Project Sentinel fails, I continued, Victor wins. He gets to restructure the company, push out the people he doesn't control, and keep protecting the same corrupt system that was selling user data 5 years ago. But if Sentinel launches successfully, if we fix this problem and prove that the company can function without his influence, then I have leverage. I can push for a real investigation. I can expose what he did. And what about me? Andre asked quietly. What do I get out of this? Another chance to be chewed up and spit out by a system that was designed to crush people like me. I didn't have an easy answer for that. I couldn't promise him justice. I couldn't undo 5 years of suffering. I couldn't give him back his career or his marriage or the nights his daughter had spent wondering why their lives had fallen apart. I can't change what happened, I said honestly, but I can make sure it doesn't stay buried. I can make sure the people who hurt you face consequences. And I can make sure that when this story comes out, and it will come out, you're not remembered as the man who leaked company secrets. You're remembered as the man who tried to stop something wrong. Andre stared at me for a long moment. Behind him, the lamp flickered slightly, casting shadows across his face. You know what the hardest part was? He said finally. It wasn't losing my job. It wasn't even losing my wife, though. That came close. The hardest part was watching my daughter try to understand why everything changed. She was 6 years old when I got fired. 6. She didn't know what a whistleblower was. She didn't know what corporate retaliation meant. All she knew was that one day her daddy worked in a big fancy building, and the next day he was cleaning toilets, and we were living in a car. His voice broke slightly on the last word, and he looked away. I spent 2 months in that car. 2 months of Lila asking me when we were going home. 2 months of telling her that everything was going to be okay while I had no idea if it actually would be. After that, I took whatever work I could find, warehouse jobs, construction cleanup, night shifts at a grocery store, anything that didn't require a background check that would show what Apex Innovations had written about me. I felt something crack in my chest. I thought about my own life, my corner office, my expensive car, my apartment with a view of the Chicago skyline. I'd worked hard for those things, but I'd never had to work this hard. I'd never had to explain to a child why the world was unfair. I'm sorry, I said. The words felt inadequate. I don't want your apology. Andre turned back to face me. I want to know what you're going to do when this is over. Are you going to go back to your corner office and pretend you never saw any of this, or are you actually going to change something? I thought about the question, really thought about it. I don't know, I admitted. I'd like to say yes. I'd like to promise you that I'm going to tear down the whole system and rebuild it from scratch. But I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know what I can actually do. I only know what I'm willing to try. Andre studied my face for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. That's the first honest thing anyone from that company has ever said to me. The door to the office creaked open, and a small figure appeared in the doorway. Lila Coleman stood there in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She looked at me with the weary curiosity of a child who had learned not to trust strangers. Daddy, who's that? Andre's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The weariness and bitterness fell away, replaced by something soft and protective. Nobody, baby girl, just someone from work. Go back to sleep. Lila didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on me. Is she going to make trouble for us? The question hit me like a physical blow. This 11-year-old girl had already learned to assume the worst from people who look like me. She'd already learned that strangers showing up at night usually meant something bad was coming. No, I said, speaking directly to Lila for the first time, I'm not going to make trouble. I'm trying to fix something that should have been fixed a long time ago. Lila looked at her father. Something passed between them, a silent conversation I couldn't interpret. Then Andre reached out and squeezed his daughter's hand. Go to bed, Lila. We'll talk in the morning. Lila hesitated, then nodded and disappeared back through the door. I heard her footsteps, padding down the hallway, followed by the creak of a mattress. When Andre spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. If I do this, if I help you, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing it for Apex Innovations. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my daughter deserves to see that doing the right thing doesn't always end in destruction. I need her to believe that the world can be fair, even if I'm not sure I believe it myself anymore. I nodded slowly. Can you fix the system in 48 hours? Andre looked at me with something that might have been the ghost of the confident man in that old personnel photo. I built that system from nothing in 18 months. I can fix one vulnerability in 48 hours. He stood up, grabbing his worn backpack from beside the desk. But I'm going to need access to the development servers. Real access, not the janitor backdoors I've been using, and I'm going to need everyone else out of the room. I can arrange that, and I'm going to need Victor Lang to not know I'm there until it's too late for him to stop me. I thought about Victor, his smooth voice, his confident smile, his absolute certainty that he could manipulate any situation to his advantage. Leave Victor to me, I said. The conference room on the 32nd floor had never felt smaller. I stood at the head of the table, watching the senior leadership team file in for what they believed was an emergency strategy session. Brian Santos looked like he hadn't slept in days. The head of marketing was already checking her phone, probably drafting the press release for a delayed launch. The legal team sat in a tight cluster near the door, ready to manage whatever fallout was coming. And Victor Lang sat in his usual seat at my right hand, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression calm and confident. He had no idea what was about to happen. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began. As you know, we've encountered a critical issue with Project Sentinel's core architecture. Our engineering team has been working around the clock, but the problem is beyond their current expertise. Victor nodded sympathetically, which is why I've been in discussions with the board about a potential delay. Sometimes the responsible thing to do is acknowledge our limitations, and I found another solution, I interrupted. The room went quiet. I've identified someone with the expertise to fix the vulnerability, someone who understands the original architecture because he designed it. Victor's expression flickered just for a moment. I watched it happen, watched the confidence crack, and something darker surface beneath it. That's not possible, Victor said carefully. The original architect is no longer with the company. I know. I walked to the conference room door and opened it. That's why I invited him back. Andre Coleman stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He'd found a suit somewhere. Not expensive, clearly years old, but clean and pressed. He stood straighter than I had ever seen him, his shoulders squared, his gaze direct. He looked like the man in that old personnel photo, the one who had believed the system would protect him. The reaction around the table was immediate. Brian Santos's mouth fell open. The marketing head looked up from her phone in confusion. The legal team exchanged nervous glances, but it was Victor's reaction I was watching for. The CFO's face had gone pale. His hands resting on the table had curled into fists. "This is inappropriate," Victor said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This man was terminated for cause. He has no business being in this building, let alone this meeting." "Terminated for cause," I repeated. "That's what the records say, but records can be incomplete. Sometimes they're even deliberately misleading." I pulled a folder from my briefcase and placed it on the table. 5 years and 3 months ago, Andre Coleman sent an email to the CFO of this company. That email documented evidence that senior executives were selling user data to third-party advertisers in violation of federal regulations and our own privacy policies. The room had gone absolutely silent. 2 weeks after sending that email, Andre was fired. The official reason was unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information, but there was no disclosure. There was only a whistleblower trying to do the right thing, and a company that chose to destroy him rather than face the truth. I opened the folder and slid a printed copy of the email across the table toward Victor. "The email was sent to you, Victor. You received it, you read it, and instead of investigating the allegations, you orchestrated the termination of the man who made them." Victor stared at the paper as if it were a live snake. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "These allegations are completely unfounded. I don't know where you got this document, but I got it from our own archives. The email you thought was deleted is still sitting on a backup server that hasn't been purged since the company was founded." My voice was calm, almost gentle. "You didn't cover your tracks as well as you thought you did." Victor looked around the table, searching for allies. He found none. The other executives were staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed horror. "Even if this email exists," Victor tried, "it doesn't prove anything. Anyone can make allegations. That doesn't mean they're true." Andre spoke for the first time. "I have the transaction records." Every head in the room turned toward him. "When I discovered what was happening, I didn't just document it in an email. I made copies of everything. Bank transfers, email chains between executives and buyers, a complete paper trail." Andre's voice was steady, almost detached. "I kept those records because I knew what kind of people I was dealing with. I knew they would try to bury me, and I was right." Victor's face had gone from pale to gray. "You've been holding on to this for 5 years, he said slowly, waiting for the right moment. "No," Andre shook his head. "I've been trying to survive for 5 years, trying to keep a roof over my daughter's head, trying to find work when every company in the industry had my name on a blacklist. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just trying to live." He looked at me. "She's the one who came to me. She's the one who decided the truth mattered more than convenience." The room fell silent again. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. The accumulated mass of 5 years of injustice finally demanding to be acknowledged. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "Andre is going to fix the vulnerability in Project Sentinel. He's going to do it in the next 48 hours, and he's going to do it alone, without interference from anyone in this room. When he's finished, we're going to launch on schedule, and this company is going to survive." I turned to Victor. "And you're going to leave right now. You're going to go home and wait for a call from our legal team, who will be conducting a full internal investigation into the allegations Andre has raised. If those allegations are substantiated, and I believe they will be, you will resign from this company quietly and permanently." Victor stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "I've been with this company since before you were hired. I supported your promotion. You used me?" I cut him off. "You supported my promotion because you thought you could control me." Because you thought I'd be so grateful for your mentorship that I'd never look too closely at the skeletons in your closet. I met his eyes without flinching. You were wrong. For a long moment, Victor stood there, his hands trembling with barely suppressed rage. I could see him calculating his options, looking for an angle, a way out. That was what men like Victor did. They always believed there was a deal to be made, a lever to pull. But there was no lever this time. Finally, without another word, Victor turned and walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Brian, I said, turning to the lead systems architect, I need you to give Andre full access to the development servers, admin level, whatever he needs. Brian nodded slowly, still looking shell-shocked. And the rest of you? I continued, addressing the room. We have a launch to prepare for. I suggest we focus on that. The meeting dissolved into stunned silence as executives began gathering their things. I watched them file out, their expressions a mix of confusion and relief and fear of what came next. When the room was finally empty except for me and Andre, I allowed myself a moment to feel the enormity of what had just happened. Thank you, I said quietly. Andre looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Don't thank me yet, I haven't fixed anything. I meant for trusting me, for coming here after everything they did to you. Andre was quiet for a moment. I didn't do it for trust, he said finally. I told you last night I did it for my daughter so she could see that sometimes the truth wins. He turned toward the door, then stopped. You should know something. When I fix the system, I'm going to leave something behind. A piece of documentation embedded in the code. A record of what really happened 5 years ago. Encrypted but accessible to anyone who knows where to look. I frowned. Why? Because companies forget, people get promoted, scandals get buried, and 5 years from now, someone might try to rewrite history. They might say Victor resigned for personal reasons or that I was just a disgruntled employee with a grudge. Andre's eyes were hard. I want the truth written into the foundation of this company. I want it to be permanent. I nodded slowly. I understand. Andre walked out without another word, leaving me alone in the empty conference room. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of coffee and anxiety and progress reports that I barely understood. Andre worked alone in a secured development room, refusing all assistance from Brian Santos's team. I had food delivered to him at regular intervals, and I stopped by twice a day to check on his progress, but I never stayed long. I could tell he didn't want an audience. On the morning of the launch, I arrived at the office early to find Andre waiting for me in the lobby. He looked exhausted, his suit was wrinkled, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he had the hollow look of someone who had pushed himself far past their limits. But when he saw me, something like a smile crossed his face. It's done, he said. I felt something loosen in my chest. The vulnerability unfixed, patched, tested, Project Sentinel is ready to launch. He handed me a USB drive. That's the documentation. Every change I made, every line of code I touched, explained in detail. Your engineering team will be able to maintain it going forward. I took the drive, turning it over in my hands. I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by keeping your promises. Andre's voice was quiet but firm. You said you'd expose what Victor did. You said you'd make sure the truth came out. I will. And you said you'd change something. You didn't know what, but you said you'd try. I nodded. I remember. Andre studied my face for a long moment as if looking for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. Then we're even. He turned to leave, but I called after him. Andre, wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. There's a board meeting this afternoon after the launch. I'm going to recommend that the company formally reinstate you. Full restoration of your title, your salary, your benefits, back pay for the years you lost, everything. Andre stood very still. I'll make sure you get what you deserve, I continued. The position, the recognition, all of it. You can come back. For a long moment, Andre didn't respond. Then slowly he turned to face me. You think that's what I want? I hesitated. I assumed. You assumed I spent 5 years dreaming of getting my old job back, of walking into that corner office and pretending nothing happened. Andre shook his head. That job doesn't exist anymore. The man who wanted it doesn't exist anymore either. His voice softened. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do. but I don't need a title to know who I am. I've known who I am through every night I spent sleeping in a car with my daughter, through every floor I mopped and every toilet I cleaned, while people who couldn't code their way out of a paper bag walked past me like I was invisible. He took a breath. I'm not going back to that life, not because it was beneath me, but because I built something better, something that matters more than any stock options or corner office. I thought about the community center, the children's drawings on the windows, the faded banner advertising free coding classes. Rising stars, I said quietly. Andre nodded. Those kids, they're me 25, 30 years ago. They're smart, they're hungry, and no one's giving them a chance. The system isn't designed for people like them. It never has been. His eyes met mine. But I can change that. I can give them what no one gave me, the tools and the confidence to build their own futures. I felt something shift in my understanding. What do you need? Andre smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen from him. Ask me after your launch. Project Sentinel launched at noon, Eastern Standard Time. I watched from the main floor as the engineering team monitored the rollout, their faces tense with anticipation. The first hour passed without incident, then the second. By the end of the day, it was clear Andre's fix had worked. The system was stable, secure, and performing beyond projections. The celebration was subdued. Too much had happened in the past few days for anyone to feel truly triumphant, but there was relief in the air. I accepted congratulations from my team, fielded calls from board members, and gave a brief statement to the press that said nothing about the crisis we'd barely averted. When the chaos finally settled, I gathered the entire company for an all-hands meeting. Standing on the small stage in the main atrium, looking out at hundreds of faces, engineers, marketers, salespeople, janitors, I felt the weight of what I was about to say. I want to tell you a story, I began. It's not a comfortable story, and it doesn't paint this company in a good light, but I think you deserve to hear it. I told them about Andre Coleman, about his contributions to the technology we'd all built our careers on, about the email he'd sent and the injustice that followed, about 5 years of exile for a man whose only crime was telling the truth. I told them about Victor Lang and about the investigation that was already underway, and then I told them something harder. I want to be honest with you about my own role in this, not in what happened 5 years ago. I wasn't here then, but in what's been happening in this building every day since I became CEO. I took a breath. Andre Coleman has worked in this building for 18 months. 18 months of mopping our floors and emptying our trash and cleaning our bathrooms. And in that entire time, I never once looked at him. I never once wondered who he was or what his story might be. I saw a janitor and I assumed that was all there was to see. The room was completely silent. When I finally did look, when I finally paid attention, it was because I suspected him of something criminal, because my first instinct when I saw a black man in a place he wasn't supposed to be was to assume the worst. I let that sink in. I'd like to tell you that I'm not that kind of person, that I don't carry those assumptions, those biases, but the truth is, I do. We all do. And unless we're willing to confront that, to really look at the ways we've been taught to see certain people as threats and others as colleagues, we're going to keep making the same mistakes. We're going to keep destroying good people because they don't look like what we expect. I looked out at the sea of faces. I can't undo what was done to Andre Coleman. I can't give him back 5 years of his life, or the nights his daughter spent sleeping in a car, or the marriage that fell apart under the weight of what this company did to him. But I can make sure we do better starting today. The investigation into Victor Lang concluded 3 weeks later. The findings were damning. Not only had Victor orchestrated Andre's termination, but he had actively participated in the data selling scheme Andre had tried to expose. The transaction records Andre had preserved were authenticated, and 3 other executives were implicated in the cover-up. Victor resigned for personal reasons. The official statement made no mention of the investigation, but everyone who mattered knew the truth. Within a month, he had quietly relocated to a different state. his reputation in the industry destroyed by whispers that spread faster than any press release. Apex Innovations issued a formal apology to Andre Coleman. The statement acknowledged the wrongful termination, the fabricated charges, and the systematic retaliation he had suffered. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough, but it was a start. I also kept my other promise. I established a new policy requiring independent review of all terminations. I created a whistleblower protection fund with legal support and financial resources for employees who reported wrongdoing. I hired a chief ethics officer with real authority and a mandate to investigate complaints without interference from senior leadership. And I approved a $2 million GR. I learned the hardest lesson of my life the night I followed Andre Coleman home from Apex Innovations in Chicago, my heart pounding with every shadow on those South Side streets. I'd built my whole career seeing the world in black and white, janitor equals threat, executive equals trustworthy, until that quiet man with the worn backpack showed me the truth I'd been blind to. He wasn't stealing secrets. He was a father who'd once designed the very system that paid my salary. A man whose only crime was trying to protect people from the same company that destroyed him. Watching him kneel beside those kids at Rising Stars Community Center, guiding their little fingers across ancient keyboards with a patience born from 5 years of heartbreak, cracked something open in me. I realized how easy it is to glance at someone's uniform, their skin, their tired eyes, and decide their whole story in a heartbeat. But real courage isn't in the corner office. It's in the midnight choices to look closer, to question your own gut when it whispers suspicion, and to stand up even when it costs you everything you thought you knew. Andre taught me that the system only changes when someone refuses to look away, and that grace, real messy grace, starts with admitting we all carry biases that can ruin lives if we let them. My chest still tightens thinking about Lila squeezing her dad's hand, wondering if the world would ever be fair again. If Andre's story hits you the way it still hits me, if it makes you want to see the person behind the label in your own life, drop a comment below and tell me, what assumption have you let go of lately? And if these raw, real-life lessons light a fire in you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the next one that might just change how you see the world.